My name is Stuart Scott. My organization is called the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative. We have partners in our consensus on climate a rare consensus between the domains of spirituality and science. Today's show is entitled Food Choices, and the subtitle is perhaps the sacred cow of civilization. No one wants to be told what to eat, but what we eat is very critical for the health of our planet as well as our own health, as we'll see during this show. And today's guests, we have with us Sailesh Rao, who's the Executive Director of Climate Healers, and Emily Rushton, Oratayao, did I get that right? New Zealand Health and Climate Council, and Deborah Boudreau from the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. Now, this disclaimer that the opinions expressed by these three people are not necessarily those of the organizations they represent. We're going to start this show with a clip from the movie Cowspiracy, and Sailesh was one of the producers of this movie. It's one of the real milestones, I believe, in this quest to try to get humanity to make wiser food choices.
You know, the world's climate scientists tell us that the highest safe level of emissions would be around 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We're already at 400. They tell us that the sort of safest we could hope to do without having perilous implications as far as drought, famine, human conflict, major species extinction would be about a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. We're rapidly approaching that, and with all the built-in carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere, we're easily going to exceed that. So on our watch, we are facing the next major extinction of species on the Earth that we haven't seen since the time of the dinosaurs disappearing. You know, when whole countries go underwater because of sea level rise, when whole countries find that there's so much drought that they can't feed their population, and as a result they need to desperately migrate to another country or invade another country. I mean, we're going to have climate wars in the future.
And what about livestock and animal agriculture?
Well, what about it? I mean,
the film goes on to explore the, shall we say, the dead zone amongst environmental NGOs in terms of animal agriculture. I don't want to steal the whole film or give it away, but there appears to be a lot of funding from the meat industry to some of these NGOs. So it's there's questions of conflict of interest even within our environmental organizations, some of the best known, like the Sierra Club. Now, Sailesh, I'd like you to discuss the 3 slides that you gave me.
Right. We produced Cowspiracy in 2014, and since then, we have been working on another follow-up documentary called What the Health, which is about the healthcare NGOs, also having similar issues, talking about food choices. So you wonder what is happening. Why is there such a widespread cowspiracy among the elites in the system? And we realize it is a systemic issue. Because we have a system, a socioeconomic system, that's growth-oriented, and that's based on consumption as an organizing value and competition as an organizing principle. And because it's growth-oriented, we have been growing our population and our livestock continuously. See, if you look at what has happened to the biomass distribution of the planet, from 10,000 to 100,000 years ago, human beings were such a small blip. Most of the biomass was for wildlife. It was measured to be about 200 million metric tons. By 1970, human population alone, the biomass of humans alone, was equal to the biomass of all wild megafauna from 10,000 years ago. And on top of that, our livestock was double our biomass. From 1970 to 2010, we doubled our population again, so our weight is now double the weight of all the wildlife from 10,000 years ago. And our livestock is 2.5 times our weight, And what is worse is that our livestock eat 5 times as much food as we do, because they are mostly young animals, and they're eating a lot in order to grow. And all of this is being held up by the ecosystem. It's really the wild animals who are supporting all of us. And they have been shrinking. So they are down by 52% from 1970 to 2010. Okay? So as if you have a weightlifter or a bunch of weightlifters who are lifting 5 times their weight, and they discover that they are on quicksand and they're sinking. So what is the first thing they should do with the weight they're lifting? Should we not drop those weights? Or should we continue to hold on to them? That's the situation we are in at the moment. So if you look at where we are headed, what can we do going forward? If we continue with the current system, and this is what the UN is talking about, UN COP21, all these meetings are about trying to continue the current system far into the future. So this system is based on growth. So how can we continue this growth and continue destroying wild animals without causing a mass extinction?
Yes, let's note that quote from Georges Monbiot in the lower right corner: extinction is the bycatch of consumerism.
Yes, extinction is the bycatch of consumerism, and that includes a mass genocide of human beings. So this is what we are talking about here. We are sitting here and doing a planning of the controlled genocide of human beings. Yeah. Should it be poor people? Should it be brown people? Should it be black people? I mean, this is the kind of discussion we are having because we are stuck in this socioeconomic system. So the best thing we can do is to figure out how to keep this thing stable while human population decreases. And eventually, when wild animals get to be so small that they cannot support us anymore, they're going to die off. We are all going to die off. So it's about determining who is going to be the survivors of this massive experiment we are doing.
And this is not science fiction, the possible die-off of species, including our own. And there are very many credible scientists who are saying that there may be only a few thousand humans left at the poles by the end of the century, if we go to 3 or 4 degrees of warming or more.
But this assumes that we are going to continue the current system. You know, I look at this diagram and I see tremendous opportunity because we are feeding 5 times as much food to our livestock than what we eat today, which means that if we did the right thing, if we move to a compassionate future, we will free up tremendous resources for us to sequester carbon and for us to bring back the wild animals, the wildlife, restore the biodiversity of the planet. So this is what I call the compassionate future, where we take care of our animals as well as we take care of ourselves. Then we will have the room to grow our population to 9 billion, and then eventually we will decrease our population naturally over time as we go into this compassionate future, because in the Western world, we already know that people are having less children than replacement. So this is a future that is open to us, and it's a choice we make with our food every day.
Now, if you look at the final column of that slide where the numbers of humans have shrunk, we are probably, in my estimation at least, that of many others, involved in that process, that our population cannot be sustained at its current level.
Yes.
Not possible. But we will deal with the population question in the next press conference at the end of this half hour. Now, I'd like to give the mic to Emily Rushton from New Zealand. But first, I want to show something that I gleaned off of the internet from a YouTube. When I showed it to Emily earlier that I was going to include this in her part of the talk, she told me that she also uses this video, the entirety of it, I guess, in talks that she gives. So it was very appropriate. I read her mind. It's a 2-minute video called She's Alive, referring to the Earth. Very much worth your watching. It's probably got millions of views on YouTube. Now, Emily, would you give us your perspective on the question of food choices?
Yeah, thank you. Food choice is something that a lot of people don't realise it has such an impact on climate change. That we think as a culture, it is a choice, and I would like to challenge that. This picture here that you can see, I've just been spending some time in the Pacific, and they are already going through this type of, extinction. There's a lot of people that are already being very, really impacted. That is a school, and it had land around it, but it doesn't anymore. There's hundreds of villages just in Fiji that are having to relocate in the next few, decades. And these people are real people that really matter. They're people that I have close relationships to and have lost a lot of members of their family and things as well in these circumstances. What we don't realise, we're not connecting to, is how big an issue animal agriculture is. We've known about fossil fuels for a very long time, and in our culture, we understand that it's better for us to ride the bus or bikes. What we're not connecting to is the fact that eating like red meat or something like cheese is basically as bad. It's bad from a health perspective for us. We get that from the World Health Organization and things like that. But also, the animal agricultural industry, is actually on par emission-wise with the entire transport industry, and that includes sort of aviation. And we're not even talking about it in those kinds of terms.
And the major companies that profit from the animal industry and feeding those animals, the Cargills of the world, not to single them out, have a stranglehold on the voice of our government, where what governments can say about the health or lack thereof of certain food choices is distorted, because you can't do that. You can't take dairy out of the food pyramid. You can't lower it or,
That's absolutely right. Actually, there are some governments that have been able to put into their recommendations, but for example, America, this year, they were going to put into their nutritional guidelines to reduce meat, but it was lobbied out because the companies didn't want to have their bottom line hit. And so at the moment, we're having... It's basically, in my opinion, this is like an act of war. And that might sound really hideous and extreme, but there are people that are losing their entire nations. That is extreme. And if you're talking about wiping countries off the planet for profit,
that slide you've got here, I just looked at it very carefully, and what you're seeing is someone's home crumbling into the ocean, yeah?
Yeah, basically. That is right at the edge of the other building for the school. Yeah. So I think it really should be considered. It's basically, in my opinion, is that not a crime against humanity, these industries that are doing this? And in the future, we're starting to think in this way. So they need to be very careful and start trying to actually stop the impacts that they're having. I think it's really important that our governments start taking a harder line, not only for what they're impacting on other people, but for our own health as well, because we know from a lot of studies that if we reduce the amount of animal products in our diets, we will save millions of lives throughout the world. Even if we halved the amount of meat and things that we were eating, which, as we saw before, it has increased over time, and if we're talking about culture, a lot of people say, but it's my choice, it's my culture. Culture's very fluid, and it has changed tremendously just in the last few decades. And there's a lot of countries, like China has been slowly increasing their meat consumption. But they a few months ago said even though they're only eating 1/8 of the amount of meat that America is currently, they're actually already going to start decreasing because of the health and the environmental impacts. And so we should be removing the subsidies. We should be controlling advertising, which also might sound extreme. But if we are advertising to people something that's going to is going to increase, our health burdens, which we are having huge issues with in the West, but we're also then really significantly impacting whole cultures, we need to realise that that's not okay to promote that and encourage that. So our advertising needs to be restricted and controlled, and education as well.
If I may for a moment interject, because I keep hearing in what you're saying the master thesis that I propose and try to slip in wherever I can, that we don't control our money system, our economic system. It controls us. It optimizes for money, not for health. It finds a way through hiring the right people who are best at making money, whatever, and ignoring the health impacts. It hires the best lobbyists that money can buy to go to Washington, D.C., for instance, and now that we have a presidential change coming, they may not even need to spend so much money on lobbying, unfortunately. We need to revise our whole economic view of civilization if we're going to survive. Just looking at climate is kind of looking at your feet while there's a tsunami coming at you.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think what we need to realise at the moment, the only winners are industries, and they're not going to be winning for long. You know, absolutely, that's a really short-term look for them. And in New Zealand as well, our farming sector, agricultural sector, is already hugely struggling because of climate impacts. So it's something that they also really need to be looking at. I know you were talking about food as well, and this slide here shows you that we have the ability to create enough food for the amount of people we have on this planet. Growing animals on, you can see 1 acre can create 250 pounds of beef, or you can get 50,000 pounds of tomatoes, potatoes, you name it. We get a lot more nutrition out of land when we're talking about plants than we do when we're having animals. 90% of deforestation is actually from animal agriculture, to grow things to feed our animals. And right now we need every bit of land that we've got to start planting, reforesting, or using it to actually fix this problem.
And I have a very good video clip later which will show again graphically this trade-off that we are making now. So let's let Deborah speak for a few moments about a few slides that she gave me.
Well, after you see the Emily's speech and then also the information you share, the meat consumptions, this number is very, very irritating. However, the next one, we see the global one. The global one, the meat demands, is not reduced, it's increased. So how are we going to educate the general public? From 1980 to 2030, you can see the demanding is getting higher and higher. And we are here in COP22, we are trying to find out where's the food choices we have. So by talking about that, we are having a movement we call for action, Stuart.
I'm sorry.
This one, we talking about where could we find the food. So we would like to encourage people to grow locally and fed locally. In order to do so, we can reduce the CO2, we can reduce the oil and transportation. So the call for the action is right here. Today is November 11. We have 1111. But Tzu Chi Foundation, we are calling for January 11. It's also 1111. Why? Because if every one of us, if we switch to one day, just one day for beginning as a vegetarian diet, the whole world, we can prevent 1.5 tons of the greenhouse gas every year. Since last year in Paris, we have capacity to invite 43 different countries, 42,000 individuals to pledge to join January 11 to become a one-day vegetarian movement. So, where's the food choices we may have, Stuart?
Well,
our choices is this. Everybody think about that.
Now, we don't often we don't like to look at pictures of what's behind the meat that we eat. And in the 1950s, the meat industry discovered that if they would package meat in cellophane and disguise it, if you didn't have to walk into the store and see a whole dead animal, people would buy more meat. So we don't like to see those pictures. They offend us, but yet we engage in that as long as people hide the reality from us. So our choice is that or this. These are all vegan or vegetarian. Mostly I was looking for vegan images.
And it's actually cheaper. A lot of people think that it's more expensive, but it's not. There's a reason that poorer countries don't eat a lot of meat. It's just that it's not our normal. It's a process. Once you start looking at what you can, I think I've met the most foodies in my life in the plant-based world. And there's incredible food, and there's a choice that you can swap for anything that's out there. My friend has made us a cheesecake back at the Riyadh just from what we found in the markets, you know.
Yeah, and Stuart, also according to the record, currently worldwide is 375 vegetarian around the worldwide, but still not good enough. We need to invite more people for health and for the Mother Earth. So thank you so much for Stuart. You create this opportunity for us to share and to invite more people to be aware of the movement.
And
call for action.
It is growing. It's hugely growing, and it's a very exciting space to be part of.
Remember that one at the beginning where that very well-spoken director of the Sierra Club is saying how we face this immense tragedy, but when he's asked the question about, well, how about the meat industry, what about the meat industry? Let's go back to Cowspiracy. It's a very powerful movie. I recommend that you watch it. I have 3 clips.
To feed a person on an all-plant-based vegan diet for a year requires just 1/6 of an acre of land. To feed that same person on a vegetarian diet that includes eggs and dairy requires 3 times as much land. To feed an average U.S. citizen's high-consumption diet of meat, dairy, and eggs requires 18 times as much land. This is because you can produce 37,000 pounds of vegetables on 1.5 acres, but only 375 pounds of meat on that same plot of land. I also learned the comparison doesn't end with land use. A vegan diet produces half as much CO2 as an American omnivore, uses 1/11th the amount of fossil fuels, 1/13th the amount of water, and 1/18th of the amount of land. After adding this all up, I realized I had the choice every single day to save over 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forested land, the equivalent of 20 pounds of CO2, and one animal's life every single day.
If we all, as a society, did go vegan and we moved away from eating animal foods and toward a plant-based diet, well, what would happen? If we didn't kill all these cows and eat them, then we wouldn't have to breed all these cows because we're breeding cows and chickens and pigs and fishes. We're breeding them and over and over again, relentlessly. So if we didn't breed them, then we wouldn't have to feed them. If we didn't have to feed them, then we wouldn't have to devote all this land to growing grains and legumes and so forth to feed to them. And so then the forest could come back, wildlife could come back, the oceans would come back, the rivers would run clean again, the air would come back, health would return.
Our health would return. It's not just about being nice to animals. Our health would return. Again, our system is optimized. Our medical system does not want healthy people. That makes less money than sick people who keep coming back for pills. We have optimized civilization for money, not for health, not for happiness, not for well-being.
Yeah, a really good point that we haven't actually raised yet is that the UN and the World Health Organization has just issued an emergency really because of our antibiotic resistance. Now, a massive amounts in the Western world, we feed more antibiotics to animals than we do to ourselves, and it's more of to prevent disease and things, and also to help them grow. So we're actually consuming huge amounts of animals through this way, and it's causing a huge issue in the future. We're already having hundreds of thousands of people dying because of this.
Let's watch these couple more closing clips from Cowspiracy.
Quietly and unmistakably, the most powerful thing that someone can do for the environment. No other lifestyle choice has a farther-reaching and more profoundly positive impact on the planet and all life on Earth than choosing to stop consuming animals and live a vegan lifestyle.
Do you realize that 75% of Americans consider themselves to be environmentalists? You can change the world. You must change the world.
Okay, thank you very much for coming. We've used up our time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Love